Hello and welcome back again to PABLUM Part 2, in which we will continue our exploration of game reward mechanics, including achievements, badges, levels, and leaderboards. A quick note, some parts of this lecture have been re-recorded to reflect updates to the course structure of IGL itself, and also some evolution in my thinking about how to present these ideas to you over the last few years. So if the sound jumps around and sounds a little bit different from section to section, that is why. I will do my best to smooth it out, but I apologize if it is distracting. So, without further ado, let's jump right back into PABLUM, the fortified breakfast sludge of games and gamification, Part 2. So, just to review quickly, the PABLUM model deals with game mechanics, which are used to create rewards in games or gamified activities, and designers can use them either on the surface to create simple level feedback and incentives, or they can use them in deeper ways to create interesting decisions and actually improve teaching and learning feedback, which is our goal. So last time I introduced the PABLUM acronym and the strengths and weaknesses of using Skinner box rewards as design tools, and then talked about points and scoring and went over a couple of different ways to use those numerical feedback systems and metrics to alter the experience of a game, and the kinds of learning and decision making that get rewarded by your scoring system. So now here in part 2, I want to talk about the next 3 items in the PABLUM list, which are achievements, badges, and levels or leaderboards. So what connects these types of mechanics into a meaningful subset within PABLUM apart from just being in the middle of the acronym? Well, to answer that, I want to take a step back for 1 minute to one of the central themes from the first lecture, which will connect parts 2 and 3 of the PABLUM model and also continue to carry through into future levels as well. I shared this quote from John Dewey, the education researcher and philosopher, in the first lecture, but it's important enough that I'm going to read it to you again. The true distinction between play and work is not between an interest in activity for its own sake and interest in the external result of that activity, but between an interest in an activity just as it flows on from moment to moment, and an interest in an activity as tending to a culmination, to an outcome. And so as we're talking about mechanics and rewards and feedback in games, I want to consider both of these aspects of experience. How do mechanics give feedback about progress towards an outcome, which is the style of feedback that I think we tend to focus on in education? And then how do they give feedback in that moment-to-moment, playful way of creating and maintaining immersion in an activity? So the first part of that formula gives us the connection between achievements, badges, levels, and leaderboards. This is a family of mechanics that are all about the work side of Dewey's formulation, that create feedback on objectives and progress and a sense of building towards an outcome. And so we can use them as designers to manipulate and control that aspect of the experience for our audience. So that's what we'll be covering today, and then in PABLUM Part 3, we'll cover unlocks or upgrades, and mana, which are mechanics that help regulate the moment-to-moment immersion of play on the other side of Dewey's formulation. And like I said, this distinction and how we connect these two aspects of experience and learning is going to be a major theme going forward into the next couple levels as well. So keep Dewey in mind. But for now, let's actually get into the nuts and bolts of objective and progress mechanics, starting with achievements and badges. Achievements and badges are 2 terms that are used somewhat interchangeably in game design, because they're really just 2 sides of the same kind of objective defining mechanics. And that's really all they are at their core, is any mechanic that tells the player, here's the thing you can do, or here's a thing you just did, which is great because it means you can make an achievement out of practically anything by just describing what is happening or is about to happen. And it's useful because objectives presented like this can persist beyond the boundaries of one game even after you step outside the magic circle and back into the real world. You can have a durable record of the things you did in the game, and you can already have your list of objectives waiting for you when you come back. So, although the terms achievement and badge are used pretty interchangeably by game designers, here I'm using both to highlight a distinction between forward-looking objectives that the player is working towards, which we'll call achievements, and backwards-looking objectives, which display the player's past achievements that they've already accomplished, which we're calling badges. There's probably no better example of this concept than letter grades in school, which operate as both achievements and badges. As you all are entering this course, you can set achievement goals for yourself in terms of the final grade you want to earn, and then eventually at the end of the term you will receive a grade and it will go in your transcript as a record of your success in the course, similar to a badge. And this is really no different in terms of the basic design of the feedback mechanic than things like scouting badges or Xbox achievements or sports trophies or any of that. It's all just a way of marking out and remembering key information in ways that go beyond the immediate immersion of the activities themselves. And so once you realize that grades are really no different from any of these other achievement or badge mechanics in games, the question becomes, how can we reimagine objectives-based learning feedback in more game-like ways? First, let's ask a simple question. If achievements and badges work as signs that share key objective information about the game, who can see those signs and read them? Badges and grades and certificates can all be communicated and displayed in different ways, but one thing they have in common is that there is a list somewhere of available achievements and their requirements. So in principle, you can know before you start out what all the key objectives are and what you have to do to reach them, whether that's scouting badges you can get to reach the next rank, or the syllabus requirements to get an A in a specific course, or the course requirements to get a degree. And plenty of games work this way too, where you can see a list of game achievements before you even start playing, and get a good idea of what kinds of things the game will ask you to do. But plenty of other games don't broadcast achievements ahead of time, and it's up to the player to discover them through exploration. Both games in this zone, Prodigy and Cookie Clicker, do this in different ways. They reveal achievements when you get them in the form of new badges, and you can use that to make guesses about what other objectives the game might have waiting, but then you have to confirm that by continuing to play, which can create a sense of discovery and investment that being given a list of objectives up front can't duplicate. Keeping achievements initially hidden also prevents players from overfixating on objectives and outcomes at the expense of having fun and playing in the game. The Game Maker's Toolkit video we watched goes over some examples of that. So that's why in this course I've concealed most of the challenges and quests at the beginning, because I want you to focus on your own interests and choosing your own path without feeling like there's something else you should be doing. Visibility is also a question on the other end. Once a player fulfills an objective and gets a badge, how is that badge displayed and who, if anyone, can see it? Interesting history factoid. The original video game badges were actual physical patches based on scouting merit badges, where you could take a photograph of the final screen after beating a video game, mail it to Atari or Nintendo or whoever, and they would mail you back a badge that you could display on your jacket or backpack to signify that you had beaten that game. So the point was to display the badge prominently, to make it a visible part of your gamer identity, just like badges or medals are displayed on the uniform in scouting or in the military, which is where the whole concept ultimately comes from. Badges and medals were designed as an easy way to know key information like rank, unit, and experience just by looking at somebody's uniform. And today, digital badges can also be displayed right on a gamer profile or even directly on a game avatar in the form of custom skins or gear that can only be gotten by someone who has reached a certain achievement. And all of this serves the same basic function to show that an individual has achieved some objective and presumably has the associated skills and knowledge that are connected to the badge. Another thing that achievements and badges can do is to mark out core objectives in a game and also alternative objectives. The image shown here is a list of achievements for the mobile game Kingdom Rush Origins. Some of these objectives are just inherent parts of the game, like the first two are beat stage 1 and defeat 900 gnolls. And you cannot possibly not do both of those things if you just play the game for any length of time. These are just intermediate objectives along the straight line path to beating all the stages and finishing the game. This kind of achievement is great for introducing new mechanics or key features of a game early on. But then other items on this list are achievements for discovering hidden details in different stages, like the George Fall achievement, which relates to a little animation that plays if you tap on a hidden button in a particular stage, or to playing exceptionally well or in an interesting and unusual way, like the Ace of Spades achievement, which rewards you for not using one of the basic types of units on stage 5, which is more difficult, but also a potentially interesting way to vary your playstyle and learn some new things about the interactions of the game's other mechanics. So these achievements are more oriented towards players who have figured out the essentials of how to play and to win the game, and instead challenge them to try new things beyond just straightforwardly beating each level. This, I think, is one of the potentially very valuable uses of achievement mechanics in education, because what a list like this does is communicate very neatly what the fundamental tasks of the game are, namely slaying gnolls and beating stages, but at the same time it also communicates that there is more than one way to play the game, and that the designers are actively encouraging you to look around and to try different things and not always be focused on the single central objective to the exclusion of other opportunities for play. So, to take this idea into the classroom, most of the objectives we typically present to students are framed as main quest objectives. They're basically a necessary part of playing the game of school, and that's great for establishing the basic standards and mindset you want students to have in your classroom. But if every achievement is an essentially mandatory part of the main quest and can't be avoided if you're doing it right, then by necessity that means if you don't reach an objective, you're doing it wrong. And that mindset leads every year in this class to people telling me that the idea of not doing every single assignment is stressful and even upsetting, even though they understand intellectually that that's impossible with the way I've set up this course. And I get it, I do, but if you actually believe that there is more than one way to learn and master a subject, then that should be reflected in the achievements and objectives and badges you build into your curriculum and around your curriculum as side quest objectives that can cater to different ways of approaching the material. The value of objectives in education and achievements or badges in games is that they give the learner feedback in a form that can help them push beyond the boundaries of the magic circle. And I think that's what separates good achievements, badges, or quests from basic PABLUM. Anyone can set up an intermediate milestone objective and guidelines within a single standardized trajectory. I've done that in this course, and it's fine for orienting and providing external support where needed. But really good objective mechanics go beyond that and get learners to actually reflect on what they know and what they are learning, either within a game session by challenging them to expand and deepen their understanding of what is possible in the game by setting alternative objectives, or even outside the game by presenting interesting problems they can carry with them and continue to think about and engage with and make plans for the next time they come back to play again. Okay, so there's still more that could be said. I haven't even touched on things like tying power-ups or other rewards to earning badges or individual versus team achievements, but we'll encounter lots of examples of achievements and badges in the games we play throughout the rest of the course. So for now, let's move on to levels and leaderboards. Levels and leaderboards are another set of mechanics that deliver feedback in terms of progress and outcomes. But whereas achievements and badges are related to specific tasks or events in a game, levels and leaderboards are more about feedback on overall performance over time. A good way to think about the distinction is that achievements and badges are connected to things that exist in the game environment, options or objects that have some real existence in the game, and they give feedback on a player's relationship to those objects. Whereas levels and leaderboards give information about players themselves directly without being connected to any specific piece or system in the game. If you're familiar with goal-setting theory in education, we might say that achievements are styled as mastery goals related to solving problems or demonstrating specific skills and knowledge, and levels or leaderboards are styled as performance goals related to things like scoring or grading or ranking. Now, most educators and education researchers would agree that given a choice, you want to foster mastery goals. You'd rather have your students primarily focused on learning and problem solving rather than on grades or class rank. So it's tempting to say that if levels and leaderboard mechanics are styled as grade or score focused performance goals, then these mechanics are to be avoided. And there is a decent body of research that points to negative outcomes from using these kinds of mechanics in gamification for education, because they tend to encourage focusing on competition and grade grubbing over collaboration and exploration for learning. But I think that take is a little too simplistic. Another educational lens we could apply is the idea of a fixed versus a growth mindset. And you could argue that from this perspective, achievements and badges tend to encourage a fixed mindset, where people either have a skill, they have an achievement or badge, or they don't. Whereas a leveling mechanic emphasizes that a player can grow and improve and make progress no matter where they're starting out. You can do something to level up and grow more powerful within the game. So it's certainly possible to use these mechanics in a PABLUM way that just emphasizes rewards or points or grades over more meaningful forms of progress feedback. Nicholson says that leaderboards in particular divide players into two categories: the people ahead of you who you don't like, and the people behind you who don't like you, which obviously isn't a great dynamic for learning, but is a way of delivering progress feedback that's not tied to any particular objective, but looks at the player's overall performance and growth. Levels and leaderboards are the best tools that we have to work with. Now, as with most of the other mechanics we're discussing, levels are already used in schools pretty prominently in the form of grade levels. And when I say that these mechanics deliver information about the player, think about the first question you would ask a child about their school experience. You'd ask what grade they are in. The way we use grade levels is individual and it's static, meaning that once a child goes up a grade level, they're not going to go back down. Compare that to leaderboards, which are social, meaning they give progress feedback relative to other players, not just personal performance. And they are dynamic, meaning it's possible to move up or down based on ongoing performance and changes over time. Probably the closest analog we have in education is class rankings, which are basically classic leaderboards. I'll say that I don't think the social comparison and dynamic rankings of a typical leaderboard design are a great way to give learning feedback, except for a very particular type of highly competitive student. So, how else could we think about delivering that feedback beyond simply moving students up a grade each year, which is largely automatic at this point in most places and isn't really seen as meaningful progress feedback either? So, level progress in a game can be either quantitative, based on points earned or win-loss record, or some other mathematical formula, or it can be qualitative, based on things like beating level bosses or accomplishing key story goals like solving a mystery or building a city, or some other assessment of a player's growing skill in the game. In recent editions of Dungeons and Dragons, which is the original game that introduced leveling mechanics, there are two options for leveling up. One based on earning XP, where every monster and trap and so on has an associated XP value for beating it, or alternatively, there's milestone leveling, which is leveling up when the characters reach certain story milestones, or just when the DM feels it's most appropriate to say that they've grown and progressed enough to go up a level. As you can probably tell, I've incorporated elements of both into the leveling system for this course, where mostly your progress is determined by earning XP on assignments, and you can earn XP from anywhere. But there are also a handful of milestones that serve as opportunities for more nuanced and qualitative feedback as well. Lots of games have explicit leveling systems where your character has a level stat, and as it goes up, they grow more powerful and can do more in the game world. But plenty of other games have implicit leveling mechanics based on beating these milestone obstacles and gaining access to new parts of the game or new abilities. One advantage of milestone leveling is that it happens on a set schedule, so the game designers have more control over what tools you do and do not have at any point in the game, and you can't accidentally or purposefully access high-level powers before the game wants you to have them. On the flip side, quantitative leveling based on points gives the player more control, and they can decide when they are ready to take on the next big challenge in the game. While we're on this subject, I'll draw your attention to the graphic of Bloom's taxonomy on this slide, which is just one of many stage-based or level-based models of learning. You've probably heard of this one before, but there are many others in the history of learning and development research, and we'll look at some of them in this course as well. But as you can see, Bloom's taxonomy can be viewed as a leveling system, and you can use it or another model like it to build mechanics and assessments to deliver learning feedback based on what level a given student is currently at, similar to a game designer deciding what tools to give you to overcome specific challenges at a particular point in the game. So, whether you use an explicit leveling system with experience points and stat boosts that the player can control, or an implicit leveling system where new elements are added to the game after the player accomplishes a certain milestone, leveling systems are another way to create a layer of feedback and engagement that persists beyond playtime itself. RPGs especially are great at making players want to think about their character progression and what to do when they get to the next level all the time, so they can stay engaged and working on an in-game problem even when they're not actively playing. Which is cool and also, potentially evil, so watch out for that. And more generally, be aware of what player information is actually being recorded and communicated by level or leaderboard mechanics, and also what information is not reflected in that feedback. Okay, so that was a lot to throw at you all in one lecture, but I think it's really important to be able to distinguish between these two ways of framing objectives and progress in games, in terms of objects or events in the game world with achievements and badges, or in terms of player attributes and skill with levels and leaderboards. Because delivering feedback in these different ways can have a big impact on how students interpret what you're trying to tell them and what they learn. So, just to wrap up, here's that John Dewey quote again about the difference between being engaged in an activity as it tends towards a culmination or an outcome versus being engaged just in the flow from moment to moment. Both of these forms of engagement are relevant to the framework we've been building in this early part of the course to understand games and learning. The mechanics covered in this middle part of the PABLUM model, when they are introduced into a learning design intentionally and not just blapped over the surface of an existing skill and drill or some other activity, offer a couple of different ways to frame objectives for a learner and to communicate progress feedback about that building towards an outcome. Here is one last bit of game design vocabulary I'll throw at you before we finish this section: vertical progression and horizontal progression. Vertical progression describes the player's progress towards a goal or outcome, like starting at the bottom of a mountain and climbing towards the top. And as we just saw, can be framed mechanically in terms of levels and leaderboards, or achievements and badges. Even side quest goals or optional achievements that aren't necessarily along the straight path to the main goal of the game can still be understood in terms of vertical progress towards an outcome with a clear beginning and an end. Then horizontal progression, as you may have guessed, is about the in the moment possibilities of a game, the other side of that Dewey formulation, the breadth of choices available to a player in any given situation without reference to a particular objective. This is where that central idea of games as a series of interesting decisions really comes to the fore, and we really get into the realm of creativity and customization and truly responsive interactive systems. And to design all of these wonderful things, we'll be looking at unlock mechanics and mana mechanics that designers can use to regulate that moment to moment flow of gameplay and find the right balance of being interesting without being overwhelming. That's it for this second installment, but there's still more to discuss, so look for all of that coming up in PABLUM Part 3. I will see you then.